Good morning. Chapter 3 of the book Eyes a Door from Philip Renard. And the title is Nisargadatta Maharaj. So here we go. I think it's a little bit longer than the other two, but Nisargadatta. In my opinion, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj was one of the greatest teachers of the 20th century. What in particular makes him so great is his remarkable ability to show that everything that was asked him is made up of concepts, and to annihilate these concepts by exposing their uselessness. Whatever question or remark the visitor or disciple came up with, Nisargadatta pointed out that it boiled down to clinging to patterns of thought or concepts, and he referred to their origin, their seed. Everything, everything really, was undermined as being a concept and consequently not true. And that included also something that he himself had just said. As he emphasized, the only reality is that which is conceptless. Whilst reading transcripts of his talks with visitors, it becomes evident that he himself, the great underminer of concepts, was continually offering concepts as well. He jumped from level to level, used numerous Sanskrit terms for a certain level, used the same or closely related terms for another level, and then had the whole matter dissolved in what he called the deep dark blue state of non-experience, or some other description of the absolute. Excuse me. The next page is one of these intense these photographs of Nisargadatta with one of these fierce looks that he was known for. Unfortunately, this resulted in many seekers who have caught a glimpse already of who they really are to continue their search because of the message, you are only the absolute. Often people assiduously claim that they know consciousness already, but they also express frustration that they have failed to take the next step. I don't think there's a next step. It's all about going to the limit of what can be experienced and to remain still there. One should not be led astray by any comment on the absolute and be lured to go in search of it. But as can be argued, Nisargadatta is making comments exactly on the absolute all the time and shows again and again that everything else is unreal. This surely is the confrontation. To hear that we are that and not be able to experience it, let alone search for it. That's the paradox Maharaj is presenting us with all the time. How are we supposed to deal with that paradox? New heading. That was my daughter. I am is the greatest foe and the greatest friend. Maharaj himself answered this question, and that by offering, and did that by offering a concept, one specific concept, which he indicated by using the term the knowledge I am, or I amness. He used the term I am to point to the basic and plain knowledge or feeling to be consciously present. Earlier in this chapter, Nisargadatta Maharaj was called great, especially because he totally undermined each and every concept. But really, he can be called so just as well because in turn he presented this one concept. He considered this concept I am as something to be digested, swallowed, dissolved, and assimilated. And so he described it as the ultimate medicine. It's true, he called it the disease itself at least as often, or the greatest misery. But in the same respect, he indicated in many places the very same concept is exactly the medicine and is the indicator to freedom. So again, we are facing here a paradox. Something being a disease, yet in its essential nature, it is the medicine itself. There's a quote that holds the key to the entrance to this paradox. In my opinion, it's the most beautiful quote there is, because the whole mystery of existence is described in a few sentences, including the handle to enter the mystery. Everything is in it, and all the further texts of Maharaj can be interpreted from this perspective. Here comes the quote. This touch of I amness is in each being. This beingness has that touch of love for the Absolute, and it is a representation of the Absolute. Only the Absolute prevails. The truth is total Brahman, para Brahman only, nothing else but Brahman. In a total Brahman state, the touch of beingness, I am, started. And with that, separation started. Otherness came. But this I amness is not just a small principle. That itself is the Mula Maya, the primary illusion. The great Maya principle is making you do all her tricks, and you're also abiding in what she says. And finally, that light of yours, that beingness, gets extinguished. That Maya is so powerful that it gets you completely wrapped up in it. Maya means I am. I love to be. It has no identity except love. That knowledge of I am is the greatest foe and the greatest friend. Although it might be your greatest enemy, if you propitiate it properly, it will turn around and lead you to the highest state. End of quote. New heading. The touch of I am is the first vibration. The sense of I am is a universal principle, present in exactly the same way in each being, prior to the interpretation I am John or I am Anne. In other words, I am this person. Nisargadatta, that is, his translators, used to indicate this sense of I am with the term consciousness, Chetana. It makes sense to linger over the meaning Nisargadatta ascribed to this term, just because he often called this consciousness illusory, while at the same time the term consciousness has been used by other teachers to indicate the ultimate. And then in brackets, even though this was often the translation of the term chit instead of chetana, the English term is consciousness, one and the same word. So he supplied numerous synonyms for it, like knowingness, Krishna state, child consciousness, Atman, seed, witness, God, being, beingness, sattva, the chemical, saguna Brahman, the manifest, the supreme principle, they all come down to the same thing. It is about a touch. Without any reason, something arises spontaneously. Within something that is no experience, no knowledge, no form, not a thing whatsoever. Only when you notice it, you can say something arises, not before. So manifestation and the noticing of it are one and the same. This is a very subtle, most subtle kind of touch. It is this very first vibration, this most subtle kind of touch, which Nisargadatta called consciousness, or the principle I am. The crucial element of the quote is to be found in this last paragraph. That knowledge of I am is the greatest foe and the greatest friend. It includes everything, and consequently you can be left here with an overwhelming feeling of disorientation. Very often this disorientation is only reinforced in other passages by the emphasis on the illusory element, the greatest enemy. Because that which indeed is real, the absolute, is described as something that cannot be experienced. However, here Nisargadatta most strongly says that indeed, although it might be your greatest enemy, you would do well to fully worship it. So whether illusion or not, at this moment it doesn't matter at all, because ultimately it is only God, the ever-creating principle that brings about everything. It is true, this means that you can be seduced to cling to a form, but also by the same token you can be liberated from this clinging by the same principle. New heading. Worship this touch of I am. In one of the Puranas, the old books of Hinduism, we find a passage that bears resemblance to the quote, She, when pleased, becomes propitious and the cause of the freedom of man. It is all about worshipping this principle as totally as possible, to pay attention to it, to please it. The sense of I am is so common, so ordinary, that you overlook it easily, and hence Nisargadatta strongly emphasizes not to do so, but on the contrary, to fully honor precisely this, to worship it as the highest God. He keeps hammering at it to keep quiet here and to devote yourself fully to this consciousness, to this touch. Quote, You are, that itself is Atman. Atman is not to know anything. That very knowledge is the Atman. Worship Atman as God. There's nothing else. You worship that principle only. Nothing else needs to be done. This very knowledge you are will lead to the highest, to the ultimate. This you are is there so long as the vital breath is present. And when you worship that you are, as the manifest Brahman, only you reach immortality. You must continually remember. You must continually think about it. End of quote. We may wonder what exactly is worship, because the rise of a verbal prayer is often associated with this word. Worship could be described as continually paying attention to something with your whole heart. In daily life, the best example of this is being in love. When you are in love, your attention is totally going towards your beloved, whether you want to do so or not. You're full of it, and everything that's going in the direction of the beloved occurs effortlessly. This you may call worship. So now we're invited to practice this worship, this being in love, with regard to our ordinary consciousness itself, to formless experience as such, the touch of beingness, the feeling, the sense of beingness. How are we supposed to put this worship into practice? It means that you merge with this beingness, with this primal vibration. Take all of your passion to this unlocalizable place. Applaud this vibration and do not be worried about the fact that this is still a form of duality, a form of energy or corporality. Worship her, cheer her, do not hold back anything. Give yourself totally to her so that you may melt with her. Then she will show you, within this merging, that two has ceased to exist. Two, T W O. Two has ceased to exist. She being an enemy can only be the case if you let yourself be carried along by her temptation. Here comes a quote. The very source of all happiness is your beingness. Establish yourself there. Be there. If you get involved with the flow of Maya, there will be misery. Do you understand what the flow is? All that Maya, the activities. You try to derive pleasure from the activities. This is the product of beingness. But be still in your beingness. What I've told you, remember it, chew on it, recollect it. It will lead you to the stillness. Establish yourself in that knowledge. End of quote. New heading: Knowingness and Surrender. It is here Nisargadatta points out how in the supreme principle, the I am principle, the liberating element can be distinguished from the seducing, binding element. Sometimes I compare this with a fountain in a pond. The I am principle is the mouth of the fountain. At that point, the water is powerfully spouting up high, causing thousands of drops being shaped to form together what is called a fountain. The fountain's mouth has hardly taken form yet. There's only the experience of the propelling force to be, the drive towards form. Then the advice is, stay at the fountain's mouth, abide there, and surrender to its formless vibration. Do not try in any way to manipulate the force itself. Here's a quote. What natural processes can you stop? Everything is spontaneous. Presently, you are in the consciousness which is stirring, vibrant. Don't think you are something separate from this stirring, vibrant consciousness. End of quote. By staying at the fountain's mouth, worshipping that which is giving all this unfoldment, you are set free. So by staying at the fountain's mouth, worshipping that which is giving all this unfoldment, you are set free. A quote. The devotee with his firm determination and God by his fascination for devotion are attracted towards each other. And the moment they come face to face, they merge, the one into the other. The devotee loses his phenomenal consciousness automatically, and when it returns, he finds that he has lost his identity, lost into that, lost into God which cannot be separated again, and I am the God, I am the devotee, and I am the worshipping, all the same, one common principle. End of quote. God's binding aspect of Maya, seducer, fades away as soon as you understand that you need not let yourself be carried away by her to her forms of creation. You just have to notice what is seeing her. Here's a quote. Meditate on that which knows you are sitting here. Your feeling that your body is here is identification with the body. But that which knows that this body is sitting here is the expression of the Absolute. End of quote. The liberating character of the I am principle is present as much in the knowing aspect as in the aspect of surrender. At this point, the approaches of jnana, knowingness, understanding, and bhakti, devotion, are blending totally into one another. Sometimes this means that surrender shows discrimination is no longer necessary, and sometimes this means that understanding prevents you from making the mistake that your surrender is submission to the transient forms themselves. Surrender is right only when it is surrendered to that which is permanent. Here comes a quote. First, I have seduced Maya, and once the Maya surrendered to me, I had no other use for Maya, so I threw her out. End of quote. New heading. The dynamic aspect of consciousness. Noticing the body sitting here, for instance, could be called knowingness. This knowingness is in fact knowing as such, and this is the liberating element, because knowingness is literally the expression of the Absolute, as said in the above quote. Absolute consciousness, or knowing, expresses itself as knowing something. So consciousness and the Absolute are not two different things, as is often imagined on the basis of many of Nisargadatta's statements. There's only one consciousness. It has an absolute aspect and a dynamic, living, experiencing aspect, the touch. The only thing needed to see is that a vibration is always the knowing of that vibration, and that the knowing itself is absolute knowing, that there is no separation in there. Within the Absolute, there's just nothing to know. Hence Nisargadatta calls this the state of knowingness, or no mind, the state in which attention is dissolved in itself. There is only one state, not two. When the I amness is there, which means consciousness, in that consciousness you will have many experiences. But the I am and the Absolute are not two. In the Absolute, the I amness comes, and then the experience takes place. End of quote. When Nisargadatta refers to I am, he often used the term cetana, which has been translated by the word consciousness. This word is tricky because most Advaita teachers use the term consciousness to refer to the ultimate. Because of this difference, when we use the word consciousness in translating Nisargadatta's texts, we should always clearly understand that we are referring to consciousness as meant by Nisargadatta. Nisargadatta sometimes defined this consciousness as that which gives sentience to the person. On another occasion, he used the synonym, the primordial experience, as being different from an experience, by which he meant an event becomes an experience only when I'm emotionally involved. He described the proportion between the different levels as follows. Here's a quote. There can be no experience of the Absolute, as it is beyond all experience. On the other hand, the Self is the experiencing factor in every experience, and thus, in a way, validates the multiplicity of experiences. End of quote. In other words, the Absolute is uninterruptedly the case. Although it cannot be experienced, it constantly bestows reality to everything that is being experienced. This bestowing quality is in a way being transmitted by the Self, the primordial experience, with a capital E experience, which in its turn bestows temporary reality to the manifold experiences. New heading. The marriage of two qualities, sattva and rajas. Being strongly influenced in his linguistic usage by the Samkhya tradition, an ancient Indian school of dualism, Nisargadatta sometimes explained the process of becoming bound by using the terms sattva, rajas, and tamas, borrowed from Samkhya. These are the three gunas, the qualities determining and coloring all our actions. Rajas is the exciting, the restless, that which incites to activity. Tamas, the inert, the solidifying, obscuring. And sattva, the quality keeping the balance, the quality of beingness, knowingness, stillness, and lucidity. Nisargadatta described the transition proceeding from sattva as follows. Here comes a quote. During the waking state, to know that you are is itself a misery. During the waking state, to know that you are sattva is itself a misery. But since you are preoccupied with so many other things, you are able to sustain that waking state. This quality of beingness, sattva, the knowledge I am, cannot tolerate itself. It cannot stand itself alone, just knowing itself. Therefore, that rajas guna is there. It takes the beingness for a ride in various activities, so that it does not dwell only in itself or on itself. It is very difficult to sustain that sattva state alone. And tamas guna is the basest quality. What it is doing is that it provides one with the facility to claim authorship for all the activities, the feeling I am the doer. Rajas guna takes one into all the activities, and tamas guna claims authorship or doership for those activities. End of quote. One could say that in fact the power of rajas originally is a rather free power, which in itself does not necessarily need to hook onto something. It is only the effect of tamas that makes things glue together. This quality causes us to be fixated, that we are attached to something, that we isolate ourselves, that we worry, etc. Because of tamas, we come to stick a personal story or history onto a spontaneous activity. One can interpret Nisargadatta's advice as follows. You cannot but allow rajas to arise, because it is inherent to the spontaneous creative power. Just welcome her and keep on recognizing the starting point, the very first touch, which Nisargadatta also called the pinprick. The advice is recognize the experiencing of the touch. The touch or pinprick is what I called the mouth of the fountain. At that place you are, as it were, witnessing the marriage of sattva and rajas. It is a marriage between stillness and a vibrating power. Remain in stillness, sattva, in the vibrating and splashing power, rajas. New heading. I is a term for all the levels, for all levels. By dedicating yourself to this, by honoring this pinprick, this consciousness, your search ceases to exist. Here you can let go of the doing, the attempt to let yourself pass beyond this consciousness, because really that won't help. Here's a quote. You can never isolate yourself from the consciousness unless consciousness is pleased with you and gets rid of you. Consciousness opens the gate for you to transcend consciousness. There are two aspects. One is conceptual, dynamic consciousness, which is full of concepts, and the other is transcendent consciousness. Even the concept I am is not there. Conceptual, qualitative Brahman, Saguna Brahman, the one that is full of concepts and is qualitative, is the outcome of the reflection of awareness, Nirguna Brahman or Para Brahman, functioning in the body. End of quote. So, although it initially is important and correct to distinguish between consciousness, cetana, and consciousness, or chit, it makes sense at a certain moment just to embrace consciousness in its being the touch, so that all resistance melts away, and with it, all duality. Awareness is always already in harmony or peace with its present object. The touch is the helper which anoints you in your and her surrender. It shows you that you have always been unaffected and unimpaired, free and unseparated, without the need to strive for it. So, on the one hand, Maharaj emphasizes, quote, I, the Absolute, am not this. Uh, excuse me. I, the Absolute, am not this I amness. But on the other hand, he says, understand that this I is not different at different levels. As the Absolute, it is the I which in manifesting needs a form. The same Absolute I becomes the manifested I, and in the manifested I, it is the consciousness which is the source of everything. In the manifested state, it is the Absolute with consciousness. End of quote. It is striking that here, as in many other places, Maharaj keeps on using the word I as a word for the ultimate. Apart from calling himself very often I, the Absolute, he, for instance, says, quote, nothing exists except me. Only I exist. And when the state of beingness is totally swallowed, whatever remains is that eternal I. End of quote. So I appears to be the term for us On all three levels, the person thinks and feels I. The touch of beingness is the experience of I, without thinking, without mind, and the ultimate is I, without experience. This means that the real, which we are, is always so already, and now included. Also, in the midst of identification with a certain form, there is the invitation to recognize the most nearby, namely I in its essential nature. Is I a door? The teacher answers, there are no doors to Parabrahman, dear son. Excuse me, I'm just looking. Okay, I well, I can't find page 10. There's just some quotes, some, what do you call them, footnotes left. And so I think this is the end of this chapter. Yes. Okay, let me see. So this is the end of this chapter. Uh, Tomorrow, there's a next chapter where there will be some more explanation. The next chapter is called The Medicine. So thank you for listening and have a great day. Bye.